So this week's been a bit of a tough one. I've had a heavy week of it, therefore I've not had much action up. As you may or may not know, I am completely independent and this is only a part-time thing. I do have a full-time role which I cover every day of the week, it feels at the moment. But I'm going to make up for it over the next few days and catch up on projects and videos that I've been working on. One of those is obviously the Battlefield multiplayer and single player analysis, and also Batman Arkham Knight Remaster, which you should find shortly on my channel later today. My first contact analysis of that game, a full head-to-head comparing it against the consoles and PC to come. And this very beautiful title will also receive that same treatment with a head-to-head already in the works, which you can already catch my thoughts and first impressions of the title on the Xbox One and PC last week before it launched. Here on the PS4, what are we looking at? Well, as I covered with the Xbox One release back then, this is a dynamic resolution under the game's engine and we are seeing exactly the same settings here on PS4, but unsurprisingly that means that the averages are higher. But what are they, you may ask? Well, it's always impossible to give you exact figures throughout each section of the game. These are just averages and an overall base. But we did see that on the Xbox One it averaged around just over 900p. Meaning over multiple counts in single player and multiplayer, the average resolution that I saw was 1624 by 945, about 1.5 million pixels. Now on the PS4 this is slightly different. We are seeing resolutions ranging from 1493 by 840 all the way up to 1824 by 1026, which is the nearest I have seen to a native image. Now it may hit it at certain quiet points, but I'm not going to spend all my time counting. This means that the average on the PS4 is 1.65 or 1.7 million pixels, around 11 to 12% higher on average than it is on the Xbox One. This will obviously peak and trough with higher gaps at certain points, giving you an average resolution, give or take, of around 1780 by 1000, which again is a sizable increase over the original 900p base level. So what does this mean in practice? Well, you get a slightly crisper and cleaner image on the PS4. Shimmering and subpixel pop is not really an issue due to the temporal anti-aliasing solution that's in use, but you do get a better and at points a near 1080 looking image on PS4, which you can notice even if you move from side to side. And that is very much appreciated. It's not going to change the world, but it does look slightly crisper and cleaner on the PS4. So, does this perked up pixel performance come at the cost of performance in the overall game? Well, we can already see, looking at the single player on both consoles and PC alike, DICE and Frostbite have delivered the single most impressive version yet, hands down. Unfortunately, this does come at the cost slightly of performance. Now, in single player, it's never a real issue, but both versions, both Xbox One and PS4, do not hold a rock-solid 60, which is not surprising for such high and tough budget constraints in a game that looks visually this impressive. But unfortunately, it does continue further into the game, and we are seeing lows of around 40 FPS in both single player versions on both machines. Now, these are very rare and not consistent. We do also see longer peaks, or at least longer spikes of frame times on the PS4 compared to the Xbox One in both single player and multiplayer. The highest I've counted on the Xbox One was 66 milliseconds, and I'm looking nearer 100 milliseconds on the PS4. These most likely come down to CPU overhead or maybe slight differences in the file structure between the two. Remember, Xbox One was lead development console here, so it may have gained slightly from that additional focus, and could all be solved in later patches. But without this in-depth analysis, you'd struggle to notice, but the numbers are there and my tool allows us to get to those. So what are we looking at in terms of single player? Well, on the PS4 we're looking at an average of 57.1 FPS, which is around 95% delivered on its target of 16.67 milliseconds. On the Xbox One it is ever so slightly better, with a 58.03 average, meaning 96.7%. This means that we are seeing the lowest point of 45 FPS on the Xbox One and a low point of 41 FPS on the PS4, but by and large the single player is and does perform very well, but there are points where it can dip and judder, but this doesn't affect the gameplay at all, and the fact that it's split up does actually work really well because no one has to worry about continuity with the story and therefore the gameplay. So on to multiplayer, and where most people are going to spend a big portion of their time. How does that fare? Well, again, the numbers do show. Now, it's absolutely impossible to get like-for-like examples in multiplayer, so I'm not even going to try. I have tested here both Xbox One and Xbox One S, and there's hardly any difference between the two in terms of performance. but most of this may come down to the fact that it's dynamic resolution, therefore you're probably getting a slightly higher average on the S, but really, I wouldn't worry, you're not really going to notice. So in multiplayer, we are seeing again a slight increase, but I wouldn't draw too much from these numbers. They are very similar overall, but on the Xbox One, we're coming in at an average of 51.7, that's the frame rate, and an overall target of 86% delivered on its 16.67 milliseconds frames, and on the PS4 in multiplayer, we're looking at an average of 48.4 FPS, which is overall delivered 80% on target. This means that we are, give or take, around 5 to 6% deficit on the PS4 to the Xbox One. We have already touched on the fact that the resolution is better, and I also feel there's a few effects that are slightly better on the PS4 as well. Motion blur does appear to be ever so slightly higher sample rate, or at least a higher resolution when it does, but I'll cover that more in my detailed head-to-head. Those are the figures. You can see the action on screen, and it is very enjoyable. Now, the downside to multiplayer is you can see prolonged runs into 40 FPS, which you'll see throughout this video, and a low point of 28 on the PS4 and 32 on the Xbox One. I did manage to get similar levels on both One and S, so don't panic about having an S and gaining all this advantage. There isn't really one to be had here. That said, it is a shame that a game that targets such high refresh rates and crisp response does have performance issues in multiplayer. Now, these only really come about in large operation or conquest matches, with the smaller team deathmatch and rush modes not really affected that much, really hovering around the 58, 59s, maybe down to 55 at certain points. It's not really an issue overall. But in these bigger sections, we do average, as you can see in the videos, around 40 FPS. And like I say, down into below 30s in very rare heavier sections. This does affect latency and control, which can affect your performance in the game. And coming from somebody who loves me some multiplayer online action, and certainly Battlefield multiplayer World War Mayhem, I can get a little frustrated at times with the performance and latency issues as you're playing the game, and I hope and wished that the target of the team had been more towards the battlefront, or at least those kind of performance metrics rather than the visual improvements here, and I hope they get time to optimize and improve their dynamic resolution, as that is a worthy sacrifice to give us the performance and metrics we need. Or, dare I say it, and I hate myself for saying it, add an option of turning off VSync on both consoles to claw back that lag and latency issues in controller response at the expense of image quality and stability. And it's certainly very solid in terms of online servers and connecting to other games. It's nowhere near as bad as Battlefield 4, and it really has stepped up the game. Now, overall, that's how the multiplayer and single player stacks up. I wish performance metrics were better, but as always, I am honest and give you the facts as they are. But it doesn't drastically remove from what is an epically fun and enjoyable experience. And I'm pretty sure that the PS4 Pro version may resolve many of these issues when it launches. And obviously, if you've got the PC version and a more powerful PC, or at least the option to lower the settings, you can still claw back the performance. Maybe this is something that needs to be looked at in more options on the consoles. Even if it's just a simple slider between quality and performance, it is something to think about. Anyway, with that said, I am done. I will be back shortly with more information, and I am finished off my VR article. And don't worry, I am also looking at my Gears of War article. This has been one of the busiest times of the year, both in my full-time job and games. So I do apologise if people want me to do other things. I'm trying to cover as much as possible. You can help determine what I do cover and what I look at and talk about in the thoughts and feedback section below, or on Twitter, which you can catch me on @NXG. But if you have anything else to leave, please leave it below, share where appropriate, game fast, play hard, and I'll see you on the next one.